And Sankaracharya's commentary is touted as being the first commentary on Vedanta-Sutra. There was no need to. Vedavyas himself wrote the natural commentary on Vedanta-Sutra. He wrote the Vedanta-Sutra, and he wrote the commentary on it called Srimad Bhagavatam. Therefore, there was no need to write one. But because Sankaracharya wrote a misleading commentary, then Ramanujacharya, then Madhvacharya, then Chaitanya, and then Baladevi Bhushan came out with commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra. Now, we can't really fault. What?
Bhashya is the commentary written by Shankaracharya.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And then, I mean, the point here is, why did Sankaracharya do this? Well, he was ordered to, basically, by Narayana, to kick out the Buddhists from India, because, I mean, Buddha is an incarnation of Krishna. He's mentioned in the list of 24 incarnations in the Bhagavatam. But his purpose was to correct the errors of the Hindu Brahmanas 2,500 years ago. After the start of Kali Yuga 5,000 years ago, certain things were prohibited. One was the continuation of horse and cow and even human sacrifice, recommended in the Vedas. Now, Brahmanas previous to Kali Yuga were able to perform those sacrifices, even including human sacrifice, because they had the power to bring the cow or the horse or the human being back alive and rejuvenate it. But the sages knew that in Kali Yuga the Brahmanas would not have that power, so they forbade horse sacrifices, cow sacrifices, and of course human sacrifice. But Brahmins continued to do them. And then when they inserted a cow into the fire and said their mantras, they pulled out a barbecue. And instead of having mud in their face, they said, this is Mahaprasadam. So in the name of religion, they started promoting meat eating. And when Buddha saw this, he was horrified. And he was thinking, what can I do? Now the problem is, people make money by doing that. You can see, even in the Bible, the Jews also were doing massive animal sacrifices in the temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. So Jesus also was horrified by it, right? And then they make money because people bring the animal, people come and they have to purchase the animal from the temple, and then they sacrifice, and then they have to pay for the sacrifice also. So it's a big business. This has been continued right up until today in Nepal with their Gadimai Puja once every 5 years, where they kill 60,000 animals, many of them cows and bulls. And I think it's been stopped now in the last couple of years, but up until very recently they were doing this. And they've been doing it for hundreds of years. And it's Brahmanas killing the cows and the bulls. It's unbelievable. So, as I said, we can't completely blame Sankaracharya. He was ordered to do this. And the way he did it was giving a Buddhist-like interpretation of the Vedas, but reestablishing the authority of the Vedas. Buddha said, look, if the Vedas say you can kill cows and animals in this brutal way, and then you offer the meat to your followers, then I reject the Vedas. So he basically pulled the rug out under the feet of the Brahmanas, rejected the Vedas, and began a new religion called Buddhism, based on ahimsa parama dharma. That nonviolence is the highest principle of religion. Okay. And then Sankaracharya, to get the Buddhists out of India, he gave a Buddhist-like interpretation to the Vedas, reestablished their authority, and in that way undermined Buddhism. Because for almost 1,000 years, Buddhism was the main religion of India, especially when the Emperor Ashoka became a Buddhist monk and gave up his emperorship. It galvanized and electrified the whole population of India, and they massively converted to Buddhism. Okay, so now, how did Sankaracharya do this? Well, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita and in the purport to this particular verse, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada analyzes in depth what you would call the nuts and bolts of the false interpretation of Sankaracharya. And as I said, we cannot blame Sankaracharya because before he left this world, he instructed his disciples, look, whatever I've done, just ignore it and surrender to Lord Govinda, and that famous song that he wrote, or poem that he wrote, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Mudamate. So he said, just give up your word jugglery and just surrender to Govinda. And he wrote many beautiful prayers glorifying Krishna. Right? But his chief disciple, Sadananda something, I forget exactly what his name is, it begins with Sadananda, he disregarded Sankaracharya's ultimate instruction, and he codified the Sarirakbhasya into a whole system of philosophy. Already the Sarirakbhasya is philosophy, but he emphasized the impersonalism and completely ignored his guru's instructions. Okay, so now we're going to go into how Sankaracharya contradicts Vyasadeva but seemingly without insulting him. He's just saying that people misunderstood what he wrote. And he gives his own interpretation. And so, let's explain what the Chaturvyuha is. Originally, Krishna says, Aham sarvasya prabhava matak sarvam bhavartate, the 10th chapter, 8th verse of Bhagavad-Gita. I am the source of everything material and spiritual. So that means he's God. That's the definition of God. So, from Krishna, his first plenary expansion is Lord Balaram. So now we're going to study very quickly in about 5 minutes what's meant by the expansions of the Lord. The Lord has this infinite power, parasya shakti vividaiva shriyate, as it said in the Vedanta-Sutra Upanishad. He has infinite powers, and summarized as internal, marginal, and external potencies. His internal potency is Sambit, Sandini, and Hiladini. Basically, eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And everything is personified, like Srimati Radharani is his Hiladini Shakti, his energy of pure love and devotion. Krishna himself is a person, so everything in creation is also personal. There's nothing impersonal. Right? If God is a person, then everything that emanates from him is also a person, including his energies. Like, for example, even in the Vedas, each one of the Upanishads is a person, right? The Isha Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad, they're all persons reciting these amazing prayers in glorification of Narayana or Krishna. And okay, so the first expansion of Krishna is Balaram. And then from Balaram comes the first Chaturvyuha, which is Vyasadeva, Sankarshan, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna. Now these forms of Vyasadeva, Sankar, Shan, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna are four-armed forms. Balaram has a two-armed form, but the first Chaturvyuha are Narayana forms, basically, four-armed forms. And then from Sankar Shan of the first Chaturvyuha comes the second Chaturvyuha. Now, the first Chaturvyuha is basically to populate the spiritual world. There are infinite Vaikuntha planets. There's Goloka Vrindavan, which is the highest planet. Krishna, in his two-armed form, is having his pastimes in Vrindavan, Mathura, and Dwarka. And then the Vaikuntha planets are innumerable planets, and each one has a Narayana form on it. Right? And Narayana forms basically are emanated from the first Chaturvyuha. And then from Sankar San in the first Chaturvyuha, a second Chaturvyuha is manifested, and that is for the material creation. So therefore, from the second Chaturvyuha comes, of course you have Vyasadeva, Sankar, Shan, Aniruddha, and Pradyumna, but from the second Chaturvyuha come the Vishnu incarnations for the material creation, maintenance, and destruction. And therefore you have the same Narayana forms in the material world, but they're called Vishnu forms. Okay. And Vishnu forms, you have Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and Shirodakshaya Vishnu. Shirodakshaya Vishnu is the super soul, or Paramatma, present in every atom and in the heart of every living entity. That's why things work. In fact, recently in my class to the children, I asked them to find out what is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And basically, yes, there's a principle like this in physics, where you cannot determine simultaneously the position and the velocity of a particle. Right? Yeah, human beings can. That's because for us it's impossible to do that, right? But Krishna can. Right? That's the problem. How can he do that? Because as Paramatma, he is controlling all that, all the movement of everything. Matter only moves when there's a presence of a soul. Like, for example, you can see that in a body of a human being right before they die and right after they die. Right before they die, they're still moving. They're still conscious. As soon as they die, their body is dead matter. It's inert. There's no more consciousness because the soul leaves the body. In the same way, matter is inert. But when Paramatma enters into the what's called the pradhana, the unmanifest state of matter, the avyakta state of matter, then it manifests with by the activation of the time element and the trigunas, the goodness, passion, and ignorance, or sattva, rajas, and tamas, and all of a sudden the atoms of matter begin to interact, and things start moving. Okay? And that's because Paramatma is present. So in every human being you have two souls. You have Atma and Paramatma. And in matter, you have one soul, Paramatma. Okay. So, now, the Sarirag Bhasya and Mayavad philosophy is all about the second Chaturvyuha expansion, because that's for the material world, right? And now we're going to read the explanation here. So this verse says, Vyasadeva Sankar San Pradyumna Niruddha Dvitiya Chaturvyuha A Turiya Visuddha. By the way, this Turiya word is very interesting. It means transcendental. And I've written a whole book about this one word. It's called the fourth dimension. We live in three dimensions. Turiya is the fourth dimension. The book is over there on the table. It's very interesting to understand the difference between the two. Okay, so purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Sripad Sankaracharya has misleadingly explained the quadruple form Chaturvyuha in his interpretation of the 42nd aphorism of Chapter 2 of the second Kanda of the Vedanta-Sutra, Utpatti Asambhavat. So, in his Sarirak Bhasya, he's talking about the second Kanda, Chapter 2 of the second Kanda, and 42nd aphorism, or sutra. In verse 41 through 47 of this chapter of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami answers Sripad Sankaracharya's misleading objections to the personal feature of the Absolute Truth. Yeah, because he's establishing Mayavad philosophy, the philosophy that there is no such thing as jivas. There's only what's called jiva atma. Now you and I, we are all jiva atmas, individual souls. And he says that this is actually an illusion. There's only one thing that is atma, or paramatma. And when a person becomes realized, their individuality is effaced and emerge into this oneness called Brahman. Okay, so, or jiva becomes paramatma in a sense, you know. And about 90% plus of the gurus in India believe that this is the correct understanding of Vedanta. And that was like anathema to Ramanujacharya. His whole life, he was fighting against this impersonal interpretation of the Vedas. And same with Madhavacharya, and same with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the Vasista Advaita philosophy is all about negating Kevala Advaita philosophy of Sankaracharya. And we'll get into that later on. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, is not like a material object that can be known by experimental knowledge or sense perception. In the Narada Pancharatra, written by Narada Muni himself, this fact has been explained by Narayana himself, the Lord Shiva. But Sankaracharya, the incarnation of Shiva, under the order of Narayana, his master, had to mislead the monists, monists meaning the Mayavadis. And there's two types of Mayavadis. There's Nirvisesha and Sunyavad. Sunyavad are the Buddhists, and Nirvisesha are the followers of Sankaracharya. See? So what's the difference between them? Let's just quickly explain that. The Sunyavadi followers of Buddha say that the ultimate state is an inertial atomic state where all atoms come to perfect rest. There's no more interaction. What are they talking about? They're talking about the flip side of material creation. The flip side of material creation is the avyakta state. You have vyakta, the manifest state, in which the Mahat Tattva, the total material energy, is activated by the time factor and the modes of material nature, and therefore there seems to be what you call creation. Now, creation can be misleading because matter itself is eternal, but because it's coming from Krishna or God, anything coming from God is spiritual. But matter is called apara prakriti, and spiritual nature is called para prakriti. What is the difference? The inferior material energy is sometimes manifest and sometimes not manifest. The manifest state is called vyakta, and the unmanifest state is called avyakta. So the avyakta is called, another name for it is pradhana, the sum total of material energy, but it's no longer active. And this is what the Buddhists are attempting to achieve through what they call nirvana. Nir in Sanskrit means without, and vana means movement, implying movement of the mind. When the mind becomes like the flame of a candle in a windless room, well, in a room where there's wind, the flame of the candle will be flickering all the time. But in a windless room, it doesn't flicker, it's straight. Say. So their concept of nirvana is when the mind no longer has any attachment or infatuation with anything material. It's completely negated by a process of logic called neti. The truth cannot be this, truth cannot be that, not this, not that, not this, not that, where you renounce everything. At that point, you merge your consciousness into the state of nirvana, where it's an absolute inertial state, atomic inertial state. No more interaction of atoms. And of course, you're no more aware of yourself as an individual. Right? So that's called sunyavad, impersonalism. And Sankar Acharya is presenting nirvisesa, or Mayavadi impersonalism, which is he upped the ante a little bit. He went from avyakta to Brahman. Now Brahman, Vedantita Tattvavidas Tattvam Yajganamadvayam Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavaniti Sabhyate. In this first canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, second chapter, this verse says that there are three aspects of understanding God. They are Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. What is Brahman? Brahman is the effulgence emanating from the body of Krishna. What is that effulgence made of? Infinite jivatmas, infinite souls that are described as pencils of light. Now, that is a rudimentary understanding of God. And for us who have imperfect vision, it seems to be homogeneous. Just like when we look at light, it seems to be like white, right? But you put that light through a prism, and all of a sudden you see there's a whole spectrum of colors, right? So, because we have imperfect eyes, when we see this light, and we are seeing the Brahman, because the sunlight is a reflection of Brahman off the sun planet. That's why the sun is the source of all life and energy in the universe. It's a spiritual light. And it's one way that the jivas enter into the universe, right? Material universe. Anyway, that is a rudiment. That is the first level of understanding God. The second level is Paramatma, when you suddenly see that God is present in the heart of every living entity, and He's directing our wanderings in this world. Ishvara sarvabhutanam hirdese regenatistati brahmayan sarvabhutani yantra yudyani mayayas. In the Bhagavad-Gita, 18th chapter, 61st verse, Krishna explains to Arjuna, he says, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. So what is that machine? It's the material body. And the body, there are two souls present in the body. There's our soul and Paramatma. And the Paramatma, how is the Paramatma directing us? Well, according to the desires we have, we become influenced by the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And the influence of these modes forces us to act. Like, for example, if you eat, you're forced to go to the toilet. If you work, you're forced to take rest. Later on, you're forced to wake up and work some more. you're forced to blink your eyes. You're forced to work hard to maintain yourself. Right? You just can't sit down and food comes and money comes and you pay your expenses. You're forced to work hard. So we see, everything we do, we're forced to do. However, we can do it under the mode of goodness, or under the mode of passion, or under the mode of ignorance. Or these modes are constantly fluctuating. So when we sleep, we're in the mode of ignorance. When we wake up, we come to the mode of passion. And sometimes during the day, there's a little bit of influence of the mode of goodness. And then, again, you go to sleep, you're in ignorance. But most people are, in this age, are influenced by passion and ignorance today. Most people. A little bit of goodness, not much. Okay, so the whole Varnashram system of the Vedic culture is about elevating people from the mode of ignorance to the mode of passion and then to the mode of goodness, which is called Suddha Sattva. And actually called Sattva. And then from the mode of goodness, elevated to Suddha Sattva, transcendental goodness. Then people have a spiritual life. In the mode, under the influence of ignorance, one doesn't understand anything. They simply understand eating, sleeping, mating, and defending like an animal. Under the mode of passion, they produce things like bridges and skyscrapers and airplanes and big factories and big companies and houses and families, and that's the mode of passion. And in the mode of goodness, they begin to detach themselves from material attachments, from all the things that they have acquired using their ingenuity in the mode of passion. And they take an interest in spiritual life, and gradually they can elevate themselves through study of the Vedas and through acts of devotion. But still, it's not pure. There's a motivation. Motivation is fame, honor, wealth, elevation to higher material planets like the Devalokas, where sense gratification is much better. So it's still a contamination, but it's a higher class of contamination. In other words, instead of being a third-class prisoner in the material world in the mode of ignorance, one can be elevated to a first-class prisoner in the material world in the mode of goodness on the Devalokas, or Swarga. But you're still in the material world, and you're still subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. But there is a possibility, by following the Vedic Varnashram Dharma and being guided by a bona fide spiritual master, not a phony guru, you can become Visuddha Sattva, transcendental to the modes of material nature, and access this fourth dimension, the Turiya dimension of eternal life, happiness, and bliss, and knowledge and bliss. So anyway, Krishna is directing us always. Now, if we want material pleasures, he helps us. If we want to be sinful, he helps us. If we want to be liberated from the cycle of birth and death, he helps us. We can't do it on our own. Just like if you want to go from Seattle to Bombay, you can't do it on your own. How many people does it take for your body to go from Seattle to Bombay? Over 1 million people. How is that? If you count the employees of Boeing who build the jet, right? You count the immigration and security people. You count the different governments that have to give you permission for your airplane, for that airplane to pass through their airspace. You count all the people in India, Mumbai, the security people, the immigration people, and so forth. And now you have to also count the devatas, because Vayu controls the wind, right? Surya controls the sun. And if you count all these people, it's over 1 million people. Help is required for you to move your body from Seattle to Mumbai. and then back again, right? So we can't do anything on our own, and above all, everyone is guided by Krishna according to the desires we have. If we want to sin, we need Krishna's help, because we have to, number one, forget Krishna in order to sin. But to forget Krishna, he has to help us forget him. So he puts us into under the influence of Maya, where we totally forget Krishna. So therefore we don't have any qualms or regrets for ignoring Krishna and committing a sinful act. And we also have to be totally in illusion. We have to think there's no witness to what I'm doing. Right? And some people think when they lock their bedroom door at night, whatever they're going to do, there's no witness. That's not true. First of all, Facebook and Google are witnessing through the cell phone and through the computer, right? But no, Krishna is witnessing as Paramatma. If there's sunlight coming into your room or moonlight coming into your room, then either Surya or Chandra are witnessing what you're doing. And the Devatas are witnessing what you're doing. How is that? Well, the Devatas are regulating digestion, heartbeat, all these things. We are not controlling these things. These things are out of our control, right? But they're going on within our body. That's because they're controlled by the devas. Right? So there are many witnesses to what we do. Then there's insects are witnessing what we do. If you have a dog, he's witnessing what you do. And if you have, there's millions of witnesses also. So this idea that I'm independent, or I'm in a private situation, no one's witnessing what I'm doing, or I can get away with this, just like one gentleman, Indian gentleman, he was cheating on his wife, and his wife caught him. And she said to him, "Why did you do this? Why did you do this?" He said, "I thought I could get away with it." You say, nobody can get away with anything. There's always a witness. Right? If nobody else is a witness, Krishna is the witness. Right? Okay, so coming back to this, so Shankaracharya is the incarnation of Lord Shiva, and ordered by Narayana, his master, had to mislead the monists who favor ultimate extinction. What is ultimate extinction? Denying your individuality in order to merge into this homogeneous oneness, or Kevala Advaita, called the Brahman. Now the Brahman is spiritual, because we said Sankaracharya kicked out the Buddhists and reestablished the authority of Vedas and upped the ultimate destination. Instead of being a Vyakta state, it's now the Brahman state, which is spiritual. The only problem in the Brahman state, in order to merge into it, you have to deny your individuality. And there is no activity in the Brahman state. So, the slightest hint of a material desire, you immediately fall down, even though you're in a position of eternality. So Krishna says about this Paramatma state, this Brahman state, he says in the 14th chapter, 26th verse, Brahmano hi 27th verse, Brahmano hi pratistaham amritasya vyasya cha sasvatasya chadharmasya sukaisya kantikasya cha. He says, I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness. The problem is that the Brahman is the, let's call it, the support of the spiritual world and the material world. But in the Brahman is not homogeneous. The light seems to be homogeneous, but there are Vaikuntha planets in this effulgence coming from the body of Krishna. There's billions of them, an infinite number of Vaikuntha planets, and Narayana is present in each one of them, and there are liberated souls on each one of them, and there are beautiful palaces. And all this is described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. By the way, no other scripture, not the Jewish scripture, the Torah, not the Old Testament or New Testament of the Bible, not the Quran, not the Buddhist writings, have any explanation in detail of the spiritual world. There's only Srimad Bhagavatam where you'll find detailed explanation of the body, of the transcendental body of Narayana or Krishna and Rama, the description of the Vaikuntha planets and Goloka, Vrindavan, the description of the inhabitants of the Vaikuntha planets, what they're doing. All that information is lacking in the Quran, in the Bible, in the Torah, in the Buddhist writing. Nothing. It's zero, right? So, but yet, in India, people want to read Marx. They want to read Freud. They want to read Darwin, and they're ignoring their own Vedic literature, which has the perfect explanation of everything. You see, this is Maya. Maya has invaded India big time, you know. And now they eat meat. They do all these wonderful things, eating meat and smoking biddies. Now they smoke Chesterfield and Winston and Marlboro. They don't even waste their time on biddies anymore. And they are gambling, they're getting divorced, they're philandering, they're raping, things that never happened before or were very subdued, and now they become rampant in India, mainly because of the influence of Bollywood and Hollywood. Mainly because of that influence. You know, now there's a television in every village. Before, people went to the temple to hear Ramayana or to recite the Divya Prabandhams and things like that. Now they go to, they don't even go to the movies anymore. They just stay at home and watch television. The television is on. In fact, I was doing a puja in someone's house, a house blessing here in Sammamish, and I was explaining about the dumb box called the television. I said, you know, you should open the window, look and make sure nobody's standing outside, and throw the television out. Get rid of it. You don't need it. Right then, the owner of the house came in with a 96-inch television. It was a brand new house. Right when I was saying, throw the damn thing out, he was bringing it in from Costco, you know. So this is the problem. Okay. So now, in the conditioned state of existence, all living entities have four basic defects, of which one is the cheating propensity. Sankaracharya has carried this cheating propensity to the extreme to mislead the monists. Actually, the explanation of the quadruple forms in the Vedic literature cannot be understood by the speculation of a conditioned soul. Why? Because we have these four defects. We make mistakes, we're easily illusioned, we have imperfect senses, and we have a cheating propensity. The quadruple forms, or the Chaturvyuha, should therefore be accepted just as they are described. The authority of the Vedas is such that even if one does not understand something by his limited perception, he should accept the Vedic injunction and not create interpretations to suit his imperfect understanding. In his Sarirak Bhashya, however, Sankaracharya has increased the misunderstanding of the monists. Now, this is an important Vedic principle, right? And there's specific verses that speak to it in the let me get my book here. So it says, if there's something, a statement in Vedas that you don't understand, and obviously there's going to be many statements like that. Why? Because there are many things that are beyond our understanding right now. It's not that it's impossible to understand. It's just that due to conditioning, we might not be at a state where we can understand. Just like if you explain to a child about quantum mechanics, you know, let's say there's a 2-year-old child, and you start explaining what quantum mechanics is, they're not going to really understand anything yet. They don't even understand arithmetic. How are they going to understand quantum mechanics or differential equations or whatever, or calculus? So, therefore, one should accept the statement of the Vedas and wait patiently as they evolve spiritually. And then, later on, they'll understand. Yeah. There are many things that I haven't understood, but if I wait patiently and continue hearing and chanting, Krishna gives the understanding because he's in the heart as Paramatma. When we're ready, he will give us the knowledge. It's by revelation. Tesam satati yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhiyogam tam yena mamupayantite. Krishna says, those who worship me with devotion, always thinking of me, I give them the knowledge by which they come to me. So spiritual knowledge is revealed. It's not something you can cram into your brain by studying, taking amphetamines and studying all night long. You have to have a sattvic culture in order to understand. So you have to be regulated in your habits, clean, and you have to be chanting regularly the holy names of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. You have to come to the temple for Mangal Arti, see the deities, bow down to them, engage in deity worship, hear the lectures morning and evening, and especially respect Mahaprasadam. Gradually, these things are revealed to you. Right? So, here, this principle that the authority of Vedas is such, the authority of the Vedas is such, that even if one does not understand something by his limited perception, he should accept the Vedic injunction and not create interpretations to suit his imperfect understanding. Now, creating interpretations is what has caused havoc in Vedic Dharma in India. It's caused havoc. Like, so Sadhguru says there's no God. Everyone says, okay, there's no God. But wait a minute, he just violated the Vedic Shruti. Right? But all these so-called incarnations of God or God-men in India, their trick is to say, look, you don't have to read or accept Shastra. Just accept what I say. I am incarnation of God. It's very clever. It's a very clever way of, misleading people. So then people, oh yeah, okay. Well, I didn't know the Vedas anyway, so I never studied. I was talking to one lady the other day. She said, oh yeah, Bhagavad-Gita. Yeah, when I was in elementary school, we studied a little bit of the Bhagavad-Gita. I said, you're born in India? She said, yes. I said, you didn't study any more after that? She said, no. That's basically the history of maybe 90% or more of people in India. They had a little bit of Bhagavad-Gita when they were in elementary school. And then after that, it was all Darwin and Big Bang, and we come from monkeys and all that stuff, And then Microsoft certification and JavaScript and C++ and all that. Yeah, learning different languages, but not Vedas. But yet, they say, oh, I know Bhagavad-Gita. They don't know anything. You don't know zip, right? Just admit it, and then maybe you can learn something. But no. I've already, it's old-fashioned. We want to be modern. Modern means stupid. That's what actually they're saying. I want to be stupid and engage in all kinds of sinful activity. Okay, so this creating interpretations about something you don't understand is a disease. It's called yatamat tatapat in Bengali. Whatever you think, that's valid. But that's nonsense. It's not true. The quadruple forms have a spiritual existence that can be realized in Vasuddha Sattva, Suddha Sattva, or unqualified goodness. This transcendental goodness, not just Sattva, but Visuddha Sattva. When you come to that level of spiritual culture, where you're no longer influenced by the modes of material nature. How do you come to that level? Bhagavad-Gita 14, chapter 26, verse, Mamchayo vibhicharena bhakti yogena sevate saganam samatityaitam brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature, and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So that's called the Visuddha Sattva stage. In order to understand the Vedas, one must come to that stage. Okay. Unqualified goodness, which accompanies complete absorption in the understanding of Vasudeva. So Vasudeva with the long A is Krishna. the son of Vyasadeva with the short A. And also this word Vyasadeva has this other meaning, other meanings. We won't go into that now, but so it says, the quadruple forms who are full in the six opulences of the Supreme Personality Godhead are the enjoyers of the internal potency. Thinking the Absolute Personality Godhead to be poverty-stricken or to have no potency, or in other words, to be impotent, is simply rascaldom. Well, this is the false Sankhya philosophy that he's referring to here. Unfortunately, in modern times, each one of the darshans, or philosophical schools, has a false representative. So there's the real Kapila, the son of Kardama Muni, Devahuti, and then there's a false Kapila in modern times, who gave the false Sankhya philosophy. In the false Sankhya philosophy, the Purusha, referring to Krishna, is impotent. He may have created things, but after that, he doesn't do anything. But they don't refer to Krishna as the Purusha. They're talking the Jiva is the Purusha. So anyway, we won't go into that now. Those are called dravyas in Sanskrit, the different elements of material creation. Okay, so then this rascaldom, this type of false interpretation of false Sankhya, this rascaldom is the profession of the conditioned soul, and it increases his bewilderment. In other words, this interpretation, false interpretation. One who cannot understand the distinctions between the spiritual world and the material world has no qualification to examine or know the situation of the transcendental quadruple forms. In his commentary on Vedanta-Sutra 2.2.42 to 45, His Holiness Sripad Sankaracharya has made a futile attempt to nullify the existence of these quadruple forms in the spiritual world. Sankaracharya says in Sutra 42 that devotees think the Supreme Personality Godhead Vyasadeva, or Sri Krishna, to be one, to be free from material qualities, and to have a transcendental body full of bliss and eternal existence. Now this is, Sankaracharya has explained, this is what the devotees think, right? And that's correct. He continues, he is the ultimate goal of the devotees who believe that the Supreme Personality Godhead expands himself into four other eternal transcendental forms: Vyasadeva, Sankar-san, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. From Vyasadeva, who is the primary expansion, comes Sankar-san, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha in that order. Another name of Vyasadeva is Paramatma. Another name of Sankar-san is Jiva, the living entity. Another name of Pradyumna is mind. And another name of Aniruddha is Ahankara, false ego. Among these expansions, Vyasadeva is considered the origin of the material nature. Therefore, Sankaracharya says that Sankar-san, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha must be creations of that original cause. Now, this is the beginning of the misinterpretation. Sankaracharya says that Sankar-san, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha must be creations of that original cause. Original cause meaning Krishna. Great souls assert that Narayana, who is known as the Paramatma, or Supersoul, is beyond material nature, and this is in accordance with the statement of the Vedic literature. Mayavadis, meaning the followers of Sankaracharya, also agree that Narayana can expand himself in various forms. Sankar says that he does not attempt to argue that portion of the devotee's understanding. In other words, that Narayana can expand himself into different forms. But he must protest. Now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of his misinterpretation. He must protest the idea that Sankar-san is produced from Vyasadeva, or Krishna. Pradyumna is produced from Sankar-san, and Aniruddha is produced from Pradyumna. For if Sankar-san is understood to represent the living entities created from the body of Vyasadeva, the living entities would have to be non-eternal. Okay, now what did he just say here? Let's dissect this. Sankara says that he does not attempt to argue that portion of the devotee's understanding, that meaning Narayana can expand himself in various forms. But he must protest the idea that Sankarsan is produced from Vasudeva. Okay, now who's Vasudeva? Vasudeva is the first member of the Chaturvyuha. That means he's Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? Vasudeva, the son of Vasudeva. So he must protest the idea that Sankarsan is produced from Vasudeva. So we have Vasudeva, Sankarsan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Okay, Pradyumna is produced from Sankarsan, and Aniruddha is produced from Pradyumna. And now, this is what he says. For if Sankarsana is understood to represent the living entities created from the body of Vasudeva, the living entities would have to be non-eternal. Why? Why do they have to be non-eternal? So, let's read that again. First you have Vasudeva, right? Krishna. Then you have Sankarsan. Then Aniruddha, then Pradyumna. For if Sankarsan is understood to represent the living entities created from the body of Vasudeva, the living entities would have to be non-eternal. Now, why would they have to be non-eternal? Everything that emanates from Krishna is eternal, including the material energy. So why would the jivas, you and me, have to be non-eternal if we emanate from Vasudeva? You see, this is where he misleads. Right? And he is violating what Krishna says. Now let's look at what Krishna says. 15th chapter, 7th verse. Mamaivamsa jiva bhuta jiva loka sanatana manaksastan indriyani prakritistani karsati. He says that mama eva amsa. What does that mean? He says that the living entities, the jivas, Mamayavamsa jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatana. He says that the jiva is his mama eva amsa, his fragmental part and parcel, or fragmental particle. And he's described as jiva bhuta, even in the conditioned state, as sanatana, eternal. So, and then he says in the second chapter, 12th verse, Latvevaham jatu sam natam nimijanadi paha nasarvi na bhavishya sarvayam atakparam. He says that the Arjuna, never was there a time that I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings in this battlefield, nor will there ever be a time that we will cease to exist. So he's establishing the full eternality of the jiva. He says, Natevaham jatu nasam natvam nemi janadvipaha nachaivena bhavishyama sarvavayam atakparam. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. And then he says in second chapter, 17th second chapter, 18th verse, 17th verse. Avinasi tutad vidi yena sarvam idam tatam vanasam avyayasyasnara nakaschit kartum arhati. That which pervades the entire body, he's talking about consciousness, which is the symptom of the soul, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. So, right now, Sankaracharya has violated Krishna's statements in the Bhagavad-Gita by saying that the jivas, for as Sankarsana is understood to represent the living entities created from the body of Vasudeva, the living entities would have to be non-eternal. That's not correct. By the way, the body of Vasudeva is not a material body. the spiritual body. He's not I in that form. Yeah. The living entities are supposed to be freed from material contaminations by engaging in prolonged temple worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, reading Vedic literature, and performing yoga and pious activities to attain the Supreme Lord. But if the living entities had been created from material nature at a certain point, they would be non-eternal and would have no chance to be liberated and associated with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is a refutation. In other words, if our jiva is material, then there's no possibility of ever being liberated. It could be liberated if its original state was spiritual. And in the conditioned state, our soul becomes covered with a covering of a material body, which is not material, which is not spiritual. But the soul in the body is spiritual. So you see, by word jugglery, Sankaracharya is misinterpreting what Vyasadeva said. And because of that, there's no question of the soul, the so-called soul, being liberated because it's material. When a cause is nullified, its results are nullified. Okay, now this is a philosophical principle. Because there's cause and effect. If you nullify the cause, then you nullify the effect also. Right? That's basically what he's saying here. In the second chapter of the Vedanta-Sutra, second Kanda, Acharya Vedavyas has also refuted the conception that the living beings were ever born. Natmashrute nityatvaj cha tabyaha. Because there is no creation for the living entities, they must be eternal. Now this is a statement of Krishna also. Krishna says, Najayate mriyate vakadachin nayam bhutva bhavitavana bhuya ajo nitya sasvatam yam puranu nahanyate hanyamane sarire. Second chapter, 20th verse. He says, for the soul there's never birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. He's not slain when the body is slain. So he's establishing not only the full eternality of the soul, but he's emphasizing it more by saying the soul was never born. It's always, because it's coming from Krishna, it's eternal. No beginning, no end. Anything that has a beginning has an end. But the soul has no beginning. It's part and parcel of Krishna. So here, also Vyasadeva himself, in one of the sutras of the Vedanta-Sutra, establishes the same concept, that natma shrute, there is no birth for the soul. The soul is eternal. Because there's no creation for the living entities, they must be eternal. So Sankaracharya's idea that if Sankar-san is understood to represent the living entities created from the body of Vyasadeva, the living entities would have to be non-eternal. No, that's a false statement. Okay. But see, it's just like when you read the ingredients, they say natural shampoo. So they give you a list of ingredients. There's 40 different herbs. But mixed in with those herbs, natural herbs, they have potassium sorbate. Now, it's already small print, and it's a big list of ingredients, right? And all the first ones, for like 2 or 3 lines, they're all natural herbs, right? And then they throw in potassium sorbate, and then they throw in the lauryl sulfate, and so actually, it's masking. In the list, there are chemicals that are in the shampoo. So it's not really a natural shampoo. Potassium sorbate is a preservative, and it'll end up in your liver, and eventually, gives you cancer. So there's not only potassium sorbate in shampoos. If you buy amla, what do you call that? Muraba in India today. right? It comes in a bottle, it's in a liquid. You look carefully on the ingredients, it has potassium sorbate in it. And that'll end up in your liver, and eventually you'll get cancer from it. Right? So, in the same way, Acharya, the way he did it was, he's analyzing the Chaturvyuha. Already it's a complicated issue, right? And in almost a seamless way, he puts in a misleading statement. But that is the beginning of his impersonal interpretation of the Vedanta-Sutra. That one little mistaken idea or speculative idea is enough to nullify the whole thing. It's just like if you make a big pot of kheer outside for a festival, and you have a big karai, and you're going like this, and you're not watching carefully, and you're underneath the tree. Jai Shishirada Nidal Madhava Ki Jai. And a scorpion climbs out on the branch of the tree, and when you're not looking, he falls into the pot of sweet rice, right? And now you're making sweet rice with scorpion, right? Eventually the body of the scorpion disintegrates into the kheer, and whoever eats that kheer, they get sick or they die. And say, so this is what so Sankaracharya threw a little scorpion into the Vedanta-Sutra now, right? So now it says, Sankaracharya says in Sutra 43, so we just analyzed the Sutra 41 and 42, that devotees think that Pradyumna, who is considered to represent the senses, has sprung from Sankarsana, who is considered to represent the living entities. But we cannot actually experience that a person can produce senses. Devotees also say that from Pradyumna has sprung Aniruddha, who is considered to represent the ego. But Sankaracharya says that unless the devotees can show how ego and the means of knowledge can generate from a person, such an explanation of Vedanta Sutra cannot be accepted. For no other philosophers accept the sutras in that way. So now we're multiplying the misconception, right? Based on that bija, the seed of misconception that Sankarshan, if he represents living entities, then they cannot be eternal. They have to be non-eternal, right? So now he multiplies his misconception by extending it to the false interpretation of Pradyumna and Aniruddha. Okay. Sankaracharya also says, Sutra 44, that he cannot accept the devotee's idea that Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha are equally as powerful as the absolute personality of Godhead, full in the six opulences of knowledge, wealth, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation, and free from the flaw of generation at a certain point. Okay, now why is he doing this? Let me just give the overview. Sankaracharya's Mahavaikya, Mahavaikya means short statement that has tremendous importance to understanding the Vedas, right? Is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. What does that mean? He's saying that this Brahman, this homogeneous effulgence and energy, is the absolute truth, and the material nature and everything in it, the jiva, the individual living beings, and everything that you see, it's all an illusion. It doesn't really exist. So in other words, before you read his Sarirak Bhasya, you're convinced you exist, your family exists, Microsoft exists, your car exists, your 401k exists. You're convinced all these things exist. After you read the Sarirak Bhasya, you're convinced that you don't exist, your family doesn't exist, your 401k doesn't exist, the material world doesn't exist, nothing. It's all nothing, zero. You know, that's how brilliant he is. And people, I mean, I've attended lectures in Seattle where people lecture from the Sarirak Bhashya and explain all this nonsense as if it's the truth. and they're not even embarrassed. Some of them have PhDs in Sanskrit. And they lecture in a very glib way, as if, this is all an illusion. Right? Now, if I hit somebody over the head with a chair, they'll understand it's not an illusion. But we don't have to vividly prove it like that. But this is nonsense. It's complete nonsense. Now, why was he preaching this nonsense? Because his purpose was, as given by Narayana, kick the Buddhists out of India, reestablish the authority of the Vedas. So how did Sankaracharya do it? He gave a Buddhist-like interpretation of the Vedas. And he succeeded in kicking them out of India and reestablishing the authority of the Vedas, but with a misleading interpretation of them. So how does he do it? The nuts and bolts. It's attacking the Vaishnava's understanding of the second chapter Vyuha, expansions from Krishna. And basically bringing him down to the level of mundaneness, right? By saying, if Sankarshan represents living entities, they cannot be eternal. And thus Pradumna like this, and then Aniruddha like that. Now he's destroyed, he's brought everything down to the material level, and then he's going to give the jackpot, and matter is actually an illusion. It doesn't really exist. Therefore, all this individuality doesn't exist. So the recommended way of attaining perfection is through denial of everything material until you deny also your own individuality. And then you can merge into this oneness called the Brahman. So that's basically the quick summary of all this. Now, we don't have time to finish this tonight. We'll finish it tomorrow. But this is what Sankaracharya did. And he's a brilliant person. He's Lord Shiva. Only he could do something like this, right? But yet, he told his followers in the end, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam Mudamate. Give all this word jugglery up, because this is word jugglery. And just surrender to Govinda. But they didn't follow that ultimate instruction. And because of that, the scourge in modern Hinduism is this impersonalist interpretation of the Vedas. It's called Kevala Advaita. And because of that, India is fast becoming an atheistic country, because Mayavad philosophy is atheistic. It doesn't believe that God is a person. It believes, and then there are many ramifications of that. If God is this one homogeneous, if the God state is one homogeneous state of oneness, then by denying your individuality and merging into it, you become God. Right? So it's an ultimate atheistic philosophy, denying the individuality of God and denying one's own individuality. So the next step after such an atheistic, spiritual, so-called pseudo-spiritual understanding, you become a vishayi, a sense gratifier. Because you think, look, it's all illusion, so I can play with it all I want, right? As long as I understand I'm not part of it, then I can play with it, right? And ultimately I'll attain liberation. So the whole thing is a complete hoax. But people in Kali Yuga, if you stand in a public place and tell the truth, they'll come with a stick and beat you. If you stand in a public place and tell lies, they'll come and say, "Ha, that makes a lot of sense." Say, that's what's happening. So we'll finish this tomorrow. Any questions? You see, at every step, there's a quote from the Upanishads, and it's simply validating what Krishna has said in the Gita Upanishad, or Bhagavad-Gita, right? And undermining, and every step where Sankaracharya makes a statement that is different than Krishna's, that then if you know Bhagavad-Gita and you can identify that, then you can see how he constructed his false representation of the Vedanta-Sutra. Haribol. Unless you learn Bhagavad-Gita, you'll never be able to understand these things.
Yeah. So, Krishna's Kaviraj, the first one, under what context he's explaining about Shankaracharya?
Well, because in the 5th chapter of the Adi Lila, he's talking about Lord Nityananda, who's Balaram, right? So to understand who is Balaram, you need to understand the expansions of Krishna. Balaram is the first plenary expansion, but from him comes the first Chaturvyuha, and from the first Chaturvyuha comes the second Chaturvyuha. Now, Sankar Acharya, to establish his Mayavad philosophy, his impersonalist philosophy, attacks the understanding of second Chaturvyuha, you say, and makes it mundane. And then, it's called a straw man argument. Straw man, you set up a straw man and you knock him over, because it's a straw man, it's not a real man. So that's basically what he's done. Right. People who are not trained in philosophy, they can't understand what this is all about. They say this is a bunch of nonsense. Let me read Harry Potter or some novel that makes sense to me.
It's interesting to know, these impersonalists, how they do the word jugglery of such a complex literature and interpret it totally.
But if you come to class on Saturday and Sunday morning that I give to the kids, I explain to them the Big Bang hoax.
Yeah.
We analyzed it. It's the same thing, exactly the same. It's word jugglery.
Yeah.
When you hear this, how they explain, they're teaching the Big Bang even in elementary school, right? And they're teaching Darwinism, we come from monkeys in the elementary school. Yeah. Did you learn that? Say in India. Yeah, in India also they do. And it's word jugglery. If you want, maybe tomorrow I'll go through that with the Big Bang. It's amazing. But see, first of all, you have to understand English really well. Most people don't understand English, right? Secondly, you have to have a logical mind, right? You have to be trained in logic in order to see through the deceptive way they do the word jugglery, right? Now, we read something today, right? It was the 18th chapter, 61st verse. And Prabhupada nails this deceptive thing with a phrase. Let me just read that. He says, Arjuna was not the supreme knower, and his decision to fight or not to fight was confined to his limited discretion. Limited discretion. So we have imperfect senses, right? We make mistakes. We get illusion. We have a cheating propensity. And we have limited discretion. Then, we analyzed the explanation of the Big Bang Theory, right, by the scientists. And we noticed, by reading it carefully, that they admitted also that they have limited discretion. And what they're saying is not necessarily true. Now listen to this. I'll just do it real quickly. He says, this is the beginning. The chapter is called The Beginning. Traditional Big Bang Theory posits, that means states or proves, that our universe began with a singularity. They throw a word in, a singularity, right? Now they have a dash, and it says, a point of infinite density and temperature. Now, wait a minute. The definition, the mathematical definition of a point is something that has no dimension. But then they say, a point of infinite density and infinite temperature. Wait a minute. If it has no dimension, how can it have infinite density and infinite and where did that point come from? Was it always there, or did someone produce it, right? And then he says, whose nature is difficult for our minds to grasp. This is called limited discretion, right? Now it gets worse. However, this may not accurately reflect reality. Oh, in other words, now they're admitting that it might not exist, right? Yeah, they put the disclaimer. Researchers say, because that singularity idea is based on Einstein's theory of general relativity. Now, what did they just say here? They're saying that Einstein is like Krishna and the Vedas, right, for the modern scientist. Like he's the biggest scientist, and in his theory of general relativity, he says that there's a constant in nature called the speed of light. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light. But in their theory of Big Bang, they're forced to say that there was a instantaneous expansion of this point of infinite density and temperature that went faster than the speed of light. So now the singularity is a word that Einstein presented in his theory of relativity. So they're saying our modern theory of Big Bang violates Einstein's theory of relativity. That's what they're saying here, right? So they're saying, number one, this may not accurate, their idea of a point of infinite density and may not be real. And secondly, it's going to violate Einstein's theory of relativity. Right? So on two counts, they're admitting that basically what we're going to explain now is nonsense. Scientific nonsense. You know? All right, so we'll go in more depth tomorrow night. You know, see, and what is this? This is limited discretion. So if you read Prabhupada carefully, you can see through all the gobbledygook of modern word jugglery. But Shankaracharya is more subtle, and no one else is able to explain it like this. So, if you don't know this, then okay, you can still live your life, but if you know it, then you're not going to be bewildered by the word jugglers, not the monists and not the Big Bangists, because they're both using the same technique.
Just a question.
Yeah.
When Shankaracharya said that we are material in nature, but ultimately he said we can go and mingle with Brahman by doing certain things. Like, how can material then become Brahman if it is material in nature?
No. He got around that by saying the material is an illusion. It's not real. There's only one thing that's Brahman. Everything you're saying is false. Brahma Satya, Jagat Mitya. Brahman is Satya, truth. Jagat, the material universe, and everything in it, including Krishna's incarnation, are all false. It's all an illusion. It doesn't really exist. It's a very clever philosophy. Very clever. So you have to be convinced that in the beginning you're not convinced. You think it all exists. But after reading it, you have to convince yourself that this is all an illusion. Now, if it's all an illusion, you can play with it because it's not real. You're not subject to karma. Right? You want to smoke, you want to drink, and this is what Ramakrishna did. You have to read you have to read about his life to understand. This man was brilliant. He purposely, instead of doing arti to Ram or Krishna, he would do arti to his wife's yoni. Right? He would seat his wife on the altar naked, spread her legs, and do arti. He would eat insects and animals and stool. He would sit in a tree and say, "I am Hanuman." You know, and he's a real character. And whenever anyone got into philosophical discussion with him, if it started to go badly for him, he would go into samadhi, and then he would win the argument because the other guys are not in samadhi, he's in samadhi. He was like, and he made his own darshan, his own philosophical system. There are 6 philosophical systems in India. He made his own. Right? These people are amazing.
Vivekananda comes from.
And Vivekananda comes from. Vivekananda was an absolutely brilliant guy, but he was a Mayavadi, a huge Mayavadi. But he was so brilliant with the English language and his understanding of philosophy. He knew the correct philosophy, therefore he misrepresented it in the most clever way that only an expert would be able to understand what he's doing. If you read his speech that he gave in Chicago in 1893, I think it is a brilliant speech, unbelievably great speech, right? And it was all nonsense. It was all nonsense.